Welcome to Digging Deeper with Backyard Farmer. I'm Kim Todd, and we explore all the most interesting and in-depth landscape topics on this show with questions, with all the things that Nebraskans want to hear. We are coming to you actually for Digging Deeper live from Raising Nebraska at the State Fair. So this Digging Deeper is not topics that are just a one and done. This is topics that you are going to bring up with us. So step up to the mic, please. Very first questioner, tell us your name, where you're from, and ask us your question.
All right, my name is Penny. I am from Arcadia, Nebraska, and we re-landscaped our church in Arcadia, and we just planted those bushes around April. I can't remember if it was April or May. One's a spirea, the more yellow one's a spirea, and the other one is a miniature chokecherry bush. And we planted every other one, spirea, chokecherry. The end ones are doing great, but the middle ones are starting, the edges are starting to turn. And I didn't know if it was just a blight, if we needed maybe to give them a little more feed or something. So that's my first question.
All right. So I have the samples. You guys can see them right here. We got the spirea that's nice and yellow over here. And then we have the chokeberry over here. They have the brown edges. So when I take a look at them, I'm not seeing any spores. And the fact that I'm seeing two different species showing the exact same symptoms automatically makes me lean toward environmental. Because typically our pathogens are very specific to the host that it's going to, and these are two very different plant species. So with you being in Arcadia, and pretty much the majority of Nebraska, except Lincoln, has been extremely, extremely wet. I would lean toward they're probably just a little too wet. So I would really encourage you to pull back that mulch, take a look. With the rain events, there isn't a lot you can do. You know, if we keep getting 1 to 2 to 3 inches of rain every week and a half, there isn't a lot we can do. They should be fine. Don't fertilize them more. You're just going to add more stress to the plant at this point in time. Pull back the mulch, let it to dry out, and just see how they do next year.
Okay. And you didn't know how many questions I had, Kim.
What if I told you only get one?
And my other question is, what's with all the miniature crickets that are plaguing our counties?
Jody.
They're just turning into bigger crickets. But it's just cricket season, all the chirping you're hearing. I go out and I catch them to feed to my tarantula. So that's what I've been doing, but there are some baits that can be used for that.
Okay. I just have never seen the masses like I have this year, and I wondered if it had something to do with all the water.
It probably does.
Okay.
So it's good conditions for them.
All right. Thank you. Enjoy your show.
Thanks. And if you didn't hear her, yes, she did say feed them to her tarantula. All right. Thank you. Next up.
Hi, my name is Capri. I'm from Juniata, Nebraska. I love, love, love your show, by the way.
Thank
Absolutely
you.
love it. I attempted this year to plant on the west side of my house, which is the back of my house, tomatoes and cucumbers in 5-gallon plastic buckets. And I drilled holes in the bottom for drainage, and I kept them watered, at least I thought, but I was very unsuccessful. They started out well, they did amazingly well, but over time, they just did not do well. And what could I have done different, or what should I not have done?
What kind of soil did you use?
I bought a soil from the store, a vegetable for vegetables
Like a
soil,
potting
and
mix?
I put some mulch in the bottom. And I added some fertilizer to the soil in each plant that I put in, and that's what I
Because,
did.
when we have those containers like that, we need to make sure we use a good quality potting soil.
Okay.
So I know like some of the companies sell like a garden soil that can be used for vegetables too. Sometimes that gets so compacted in there.
Okay.
And then also, we've had a lot of rain, we've had a lot of wind, we've had a lot of other things. So in those types of containers and in those environments, make sure that we use like a patio tomato or a determinate tomato.
Okay.
Because the indeterminate or the vine type tomatoes will just go all over, and they will take over the world if they have that opportunity. And so those determinate tomatoes reach a specific height, they put their flush of growth on at one time, and they're not vining all over the place, and they're not tipping that bucket over. Sometimes that mulch in the bottom, it depends on how much you put. It doesn't provide a lot of nutrients, but it does a really great job holding in that moisture, where rocks help to hold the bucket upright, but they don't hold a lot of moisture.
What about the cucumber? Same thing?
Same thing with those guys. So with the cucumbers, sometimes in the bucket, if you don't provide that trellis system, you might need to look at like a bush type, because with any wind, we get those vine type tomatoes and they just kind of toss all over the place.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I'd take a look at, is to make sure. So another thing that happens, especially on the west side, is you're cooking them. Especially if you have a black bucket, you could be cooking them, and that root system just gets so hot. So what you could do is try to keep that sunlight off of them. So if you've ever gone to like a nursery where they put mulch up around the sides of those containers to help keep that pot cooler, and to help hold it upright too, that might be something.
Okay.
Or just kind of changing up where you put those vegetables at.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up.
I'm Alita from Anselmo. I have tomato questions. I have about 40 tomato plants. One group of tomatoes, and I think it's all the same brand, have curly leaves. I don't know for sure whether, I think it started at the top, but the whole plant is curly. Now some of the leaves at the bottom and actually some tomatoes look okay. I've picked a couple of tomatoes, and they are the salsa tomatoes.
Aroma type.
Yeah, aroma type. And so is it the moisture, or is it a herbicide, or?
So one question I would have is it all on the same side of the garden?
West side I have them on mounds, and it's on the east side of the mounds.
Okay. Next question, did you bring in any manure off-site into your garden this year?
On that particular area, yes, I think we did.
So most likely, and Elizabeth can chime in too, you're most likely looking at a herbicide issue. It could have been a growth regulator, like a 2,4-D type product that either drifted in, or depending on where your manure source came from, if the hay that they fed the cattle was treated with a particular product, that can carry over in the hay and actually can go through the ruminant system of the cow and out the back end. And so the 2,4-D dicamba products are still active. And so it takes a few years for those to break down.
But it wouldn't bother all of them?
Tomatoes are a lot more sensitive. They're going to be your first crop that you're going to see.
I mean, I have the 40 tomato plants right there on that one.
If you put that manure only in that one place, maybe you're seeing that. If not, I would look at a herbicide drift moving in, because we'll see a gradient across the garden on how the wind was moving it and blowing it through there. The concentration gets smaller as it goes across the garden. And so with that, with any of those growth regulators, you wait and see if the tomatoes are going to grow out of it, but we're toward the end of August, so we're pretty much done dealing for the year. This has been I would say personally, a bad year on herbicide drift on tomatoes. It was a lot to do with weather conditions. So
I probably should just take those plants out.
Yes.
Now, but they won't infect the other plants, will they?
Nope.
They'll just stand as. Okay. Next question. Gray beetles on cucumbers and squash.
Squash bugs,
Well,
all different sizes.
they're about the size of the end of your little finger, and most of them are light gray. I've seen another variety that are dark gray.
Okay.
I think they get to the heart of the plant, suck the juice out, then the rest of the plant dies.
Well, the squash bugs suck the juice out. If they're blister beetles, which when you were describing the size of them, those sound like blister beetles, and they're beetles, so they have chewing mouth parts, so they actually just kind of eat the whole entire plant. But if are you looking at like yellowy leaves, everything's kind of wilted? So that sounds like squash bugs, because they've got the sucking mouth parts to suck the sap out of those. And right now there's all different life stages of them. So, and then they've got little red eggs that you may see in some of the leaves, the underside, along the veins. So it'd be like picking them. I haven't tried shop vacuuming them, but like trying to suck those out of there, because there's so many of them right now. And then they do overwinter in the litter in the garden, so you want to clean that up. But
And then 7 or something like that too.
do you recommend any of those?
You could. So the blister beetles are going to be more pear-shaped, and the squash bugs are going to be kind of like, not shield-shaped, but kind of shield-shaped. They're not as rounded as blister beetles. You have to be careful with the blister beetles because they get that name for a reason.
Yeah.
So some people will have a reaction where their skin will blister. So be careful if it is blister beetles, and use the shop vac, which is brilliant, by the way. I'm stealing that one. So you have to be careful. So, you know, if you could take a sample in, or
Kind of just depends what it is, because they are two different types of insects that destroy plants in different types of ways.
And you could send us a picture.
Good idea. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right. Well, this is your time, if you are one of our loyal fans watching us on Digging Deeper, to be social with us. Tell us thumbs up, tell us what you like, give us comments, and certainly if there are other topics that you would love to have us talk about in the future, we would like to hear that as well. I'm going to ask the rest of you patiently standing in line, who has a turf question? Excellent. Then you are not only next in line, but you are next in line.
Frank Brown, Alden, Nebraska, and the Japanese beetles have been a very big problem this year. Is there a time in their life cycle so that they become not a problem, so that you don't have to control them? I know I still have a few.
Bill, that goes to you first for grubs in the turf.
Yep, so first on that is, Japanese beetles are another grub that we are constantly trying to control. They're kind of eating the roots of our grass. Unfortunately though, we are past the time from the lawn care side that you'd want to treat for grubs, because they're getting so big and they're getting deeper in the soil that we have less control with those products. So those are going to be products that you would be applying in June into very early July. And that would just help a little bit with all of the grubs, Japanese beetle being one of them. Other ones would be like May-June beetles and things like that. So we're kind of out of that window as we kind of look at other ways of controlling them. Jody, what would you have to say?
Well, and the question was, is there ever a time where they're not a pest? Probably in the winter, but that's the problem with, with insects. They have this life cycle, and as immatures and adults, they're bad. A lot of different pests are only pests at certain stages, and as larvae, they're pests in the turf and in the soil, and as adults, they're pests like all around, right? Because they can eat over 300 different species of plants, and they're not really giving us a break.
I found out that malathion and 7 is very effective on them.
Yeah, and it kind of depends. A lot of times, it has to do with just being prepared. And I think you can get away with the adults, like maybe 2 treatments, but you need to have it the right timing and pick the plants that you want to save most, because they're not too picky, I guess.
Under my cannas, there was places that the beetles almost covered the ground, the dead beetles that I killed. There were so many of them. So.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Next up.
Thank you.
Jim from Omaha. I had a question about my yard. A year ago, we live midtown Omaha. Our street was asphalt, dirt, so finally last November, the city came in and put a new street in. But all that soil in the street, I swear they pushed it in our yards. So now, grass didn't grow, so I tested the soil. Part of the soil has waste oil in it. The other one, all the way down this is probably 3 blocks long, has high salt content. Now, I called the contractor the other day, and he denied it. He said, we bring only good soil in. It's not our responsibility. And he got really mad. So how can you treat waste oil? What, you got to dig it out?
Yeah, that's one of the things you think about doing, if you possibly can, is remove that. I mean, I'm assuming you had it tested in a lab, or how did you determine that?
I went to Midwest Lab.
Okay, yeah, so that would be one. A lot of those hydrocarbons will actually be broken down with time by microbes or high energy food, but it takes time. There has to be the right microbes there to do it, and it has to have the right soil moisture and temperature and everything that's conducive for those microbes to break it down. So if you're looking at a more immediate fix, then removing that soil might be an option. The salt side, fortunately, with the amount of rain that we get, it's just going to slowly leach out. You don't want to put anything down like calcium, because calcium is also salt, and it's just going to add salt to the problem. And so, leaching is going to be the biggest driver, and most of that leaching really is happening, in spring when the plants aren't really growing and we have a lot of surplus in rainfall. But from the waste soil perspective, if it's really, really a problem, you would want to bring that out, take that soil out of there, and bring in some fresh soil. It's really going to depend, though, on how bad and how widespread it is. If there's just small amounts in there, that shouldn't be enough to impact a lot of our plants, but it depends on what kind. If they're like a lot of, more toxic types of oils, or more like baby oils that are more benign that, we use for hort oils generally for treatment of plants. So there could be a couple of different things that you really need to kind of figure out. It's a lot more complex of an answer than...
So the salt will eventually...
The salt will leach out.
Okay.
Yeah, the amount of rain that we get, we will push that salt below the root zone, and that won't be a problem with time. The oil might be a bigger problem depending on what oil it is, how much is there, and what your timeline is to get that remediated.
Because I took a picture, went to the extension office, and part of it's light green, part is dark green, and the guy said, that must be different soil. And I said, no, it's all at the same time, so it must be salt and not salt.
It doesn't always have to be the soil, too. I mean, the other part that was dark green, that could be, is that older part of a lawn versus the new areas,
it's
lighter?
It's all grass that he put in.
Okay.
He took about 10 feet off, and he put 10 feet of seed in. So some's dark, some's light green. And
It's probably still a soil thing, and it could be compaction, aeration. Base fertility is going to be important. If that soil that came in didn't have a lot of fertilizer there, if that's the case, things like organic fertilizers or malorganites or extended release fertilizers can be added to increase the base level. For example, in my backyard, I have an old patio. We just regrassed it. That area needs more water and more fertilizer because that soil is not as good as the rest of the backyard.
Okay.
So you have to treat those areas differently. So you want to know, where did that soil come from? If you're with the lab, kind of get an idea as what's the physical properties look like, are the salt levels changing, and those are some of the aspects that are going to be important. But you've described is it could be 5 or 6 different things impacting the grass, and so you need to probably have someone come out and look at it to really understand maybe more what's going on. Okay.
One more question. We have a farm in Iowa. We have a sweet yellow clover, and it's about 5 foot, 6 foot tall. I have brome grass there, beautiful brome grass, and it's taken over. How can I get rid of that?
On the clover?
No, yeah, the sweet
brome?
clover. No, I want to keep the brome. I love the brome.
Okay.
Just cut it.
Yeah, I just think
Do what?
Cut it.
Cut it
cutting
when?
it, yeah.
Now it's all seed. Is it?
Now is all the seed that's going to knock it all off. So your best bet is when you start to see that sweet clover coming up and it's going to be blooming, it's going to be gorgeous. The beekeepers are going to hate you, but that's going to be the time that you're going to want to start to cut it. Because I want to say it's an annual. Okay, good. There we go. It's an annual. So once you cut it, brome grass is going to take over.
Oh, it will. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right, your turn.
Hi, everyone. I love your program. I'm
Thank you.
Vivian from rural Dennebrog.
Oh,
And I have a problem of course, everyone's gotten too much water this year. And I have a spring-fed lake in front of my home. And over the years, I've added, beside the cottonwood trees, I've added evergreen shrubs and other type of shrubs that are mature now. And my lake is not only getting spring-fed now, it's getting fed off of the road ditch, everything. By surrounding trees, shrubs are standing in water. After about 2 days to 3 days worth of pumping, it goes into my hay meadow. Okay, what I'm asking is, how long can those? It's a sandy loam soil. How long can those things keep this up before they actually die?
It really depends on the species. So if we're looking at those junipers or those cedars or sometimes even yew, some of those guys do not like to have their feet wet at all. So I mean, in a matter of weeks, if we have those guys in water, they're going to start to show signs of yellowing and things like that. If we're looking at cottonwoods or willows or any of those guys that are floodplain species, they're going to handle it a lot better than some of those evergreen shrubs are. So, it all is a matter of a few days versus a few weeks, but you guys got flooded hard in spring and it hasn't stopped. So my guess is those that have been in water for a long period of time, you might start to see them decline as we get closer to fall.
And those evergreen shrubs that show like growth that's not living anymore, can I go ahead this fall and cut that back, or should I wait till spring?
So with the evergreen, the only chance for new growth is going to be at the ends of the branches. And so if the new growth on those has started to decline and started to die, my guess is those guys are starting to decline as well. So you could prune out the dead stuff now, as long as it's just the ends of the branches. Just remember that once you cut into green and you cut beyond the green back into brown, it's not going to re-sprout. So I would prune out, if it's just the tips of the branches, just prune out the tips of the branches that's brown, wait till next spring and see what happens. We hope that those get out of water before we drop below freezing, because we don't want that giant ice cube sitting on that root ball. If we have that, then those trees are going to have a really hard go next year.
Okay.
And unfortunately, we do not have an evergreen that will survive in flooded or wet soils. We just can't think of one. We just don't have one.
Yeah, and what I have for a pump to pump out that, well, not pump it out, but to get the lake water to go down, I mean, it takes like 3 days. It's a pretty good sized lake, and so.
Mother Nature is being a pill.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
You bet. All right, another question.
Dave from Exeter, and a couple days ago we cut down a 35-year-old blue spruce. What do we have to do to plant that back to grass, and when?
We'll talk about these stumping first, and then talk about the grass.
Did you grind the stump out?
Not yet.
Okay, grind the stump out.
Okay.
Otherwise, you're going to hit it with the mower, and then you're going to be cussing it the whole time. Been there, done that. Yep, get the stump out of there as much as you can, because those roots are going to take a while. So when you grind that stump down, then you're going to have to backfill to make sure that it's level when you start to overseed.
Yep, and so it's an important thing to think about the soil you're bringing in versus the soil that you have around that hole. We call that the soil texture. Is it more sandy? Is it more silt? Is it more clay? You generally don't want to put a sandier or a potting soil in there, because it's just going to turn into a bathtub. So you're going to want to try to get a soil that's very similar to your native soil. If you have an area of your yard that's open, that you can bring that soil, fill that hole, do that. And then make sure you get all the wood chips out, because as that wood starts to decompose over time, it's going to start stealing the fertilizer. And back to the question I had just before about the oil breaking down and why it seemed yellower, that's one reason that the grass could be yellower is those high carbon sources, either wood chips or oil, so they start to break down and they steal the fertilizer from the grass. So make sure you get all that wood out of there, backfill with the soil, and then know that you might get some different fungi coming up as fairy rings later on, and that's normal as the roots below are starting to decay, and that's going to happen. So once you have that area filled in, you can seed right now. Our seed window stays open from different parts of the state until generally middle of September, or you can sod all the way up to the snowflies, and you can have that area back. So it shouldn't be too hard of a task to just get some good soil in there, get all the wood out, and then seed your sod over the top of it.
So we can still reseed this fall then?
Yeah, you're still in that window. So if you can do that, the sooner the better. You shouldn't have any problems getting that seed to take and be hardened off by wintertime.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
And we had a great YouTube video on Backyard a couple weeks ago that was actually Jeff showing how to do that.
Yep.
So unfortunately, that is all the time we do have for Digging Deeper with Backyard Farmer. You can always watch a new Digging Deeper on Facebook, 6:30 p.m. Central Time. And do not miss Backyard Farmer live every Thursday night at 7 p.m. Central on NET. Thanks for digging deeper with Backyard Farmer.